Welcome to the official Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society's podcast. I'm your host, Barnaby, and you're listening to Whispers from the Dark. Of Whispers from the Dark. I am your host, Barnaby. Joining me, my co-host for today is Ma. How you doing, Ma?
I'm good.
Good. We are getting set for a big event up here in June, the Marinette, Menominee, Bigfoot, and Paranormal Convention. And today we have a very special guest with us. He is the keynote speaker of this event. He is a cryptozoologist, has studied everything from Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabras, Mothman, Thunderbirds, Dogmen, werewolves. He is the co-host of the History Channel's Missing in Alaska, along with appearances on Monster Quest, Ancient Aliens, and all kinds of other. The list just goes on and on. It is a true pleasure to have you on the show, Mr. Ken Gerhard.
Well,
How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you both, and thank you so much for having me on today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
The honor is ours, man. I tell you, it's really cool. I've got the pleasure to meet you as well as my mom in person at a couple events last year. So now
that's right, we did.
We get to actually work together in June now, coming up in Michigan. Cool.
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to that event. I know we've had a couple of years of, tragedies and things that we've had to deal with. It's been really rough on all of us, and certainly, very sad. But I do look forward to finally getting up there and working with you guys. So
cool. You got a lot of events coming up this year. I was looking at some of the stuff you got coming up too. Yeah, so it's good that we're all kind of getting back out on the road.
Yeah, things do tend to be normalizing a bit, which is good. So I'm enjoying. Although last year I did about 15 conferences or events around the country. So, I guess, we were able to navigate to some extent, but for sure, always a good time.
So coming up in June, on June 4th, you will be the speaker, and you're going to be talking about one of your books, the Essential Guide to Bigfoot, right?
Correct. I typically, when it's my first time at an event, I like to kind of, particularly if it's a Bigfoot event or an event that includes Bigfoot. I like to talk about that. I'll just basically be going over some of the main points in my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, if people are not familiar with it. But we can certainly talk about that a little. We don't want to give too much away because we want people to come out and hear the lecture. But for sure. So I guess basically the main point is, I'm not an expert in Bigfoot. I don't call myself that. If anyone calls me that, it's a TV producer or something out of my control. But, none of us are really experts in Bigfoot because we haven't discovered it yet. So what I like to point out is that we're speculators. We do a lot of speculation and conjecture, which is fine, using the best information that we have. But, everyone has a different life experience, of course. And, from my own perspective, I've been investigating and researching Bigfoot since I was a little kid for about 45 years. And I've traveled and done Bigfoot field research all over North America, from Alaska, here in my home state of Texas, Florida skunk ape. I've been to the Bluff Creek film site. I've been all over the country. And I've even investigated some Bigfoot-like creatures down in Central America, which we can talk about that because a lot of people don't realize the sightings extend that far south. So I've done a lot of field research through the years. I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and I feel very blessed to have worked with most of the leading Bigfoot investigators in the field that people will have heard of. And I like to, I'm a very science-minded guy, and I like to look at things as objectively and critically as possible. So my perspective of Bigfoot is, I've never seen one, Barnaby, so I tell people I'm not 100% convinced they exist. I am convinced they exist. I lean in that direction heavily based on my life of experience, but until I see one myself, I can't go 100%. But basically I just like to give people And particularly with my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, it's kind of a primer or an introduction to the subject of Bigfoot, because I know a lot of people are just getting into it in recent years, thanks to Finding Bigfoot and other popular TV shows. And, I want to present the reader the most objective, accurate information and different theories and, perspectives, and kind of let them decide if they want to, make up their own mind about what they think, if Bigfoot exists and what it is, and so on and so forth. So that, that's basically the book. I have a chapter on all the scientific aspects, assuming Bigfoot exists, that we'd have to address. I have a chapter on the history of Bigfoot research, which I think is very important because there's been a lot of evidence gathered for decades, and it's important to look at all of that and the people that investigated Bigfoot. I have a chapter on sociology because I think the archetype of Bigfoot, the wild man, the big, hairy, giant wild man, is something that's culturally significant and has a lot of cultural and psychological sort of angles. And and I talk about, their eyewitness accounts and my old field research. So yeah, it's kind of a well-rounded book, but basically I'm going to be presenting the audience with some basic data, so scientifically as possible. As a cryptozoologist, I look through all of these mysteries through the lens of zoology. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be presenting the people at the conference. And, hopefully it'll make for some good discussion.
Absolutely. And then we also have the panel at the end of the show with you and myself and the rest of our guests, which would be Sheetan Noor, Allison Jornlin, Mary Sutherland. I think that's everybody.
And you.
And me. I said and me.
I know.
I know
fun. You thought you were missing somebody, that's you.
And we also
panels are fun.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna skip all the Q&As till the end, so that we can all address it as a group and kind of have like a nice long discussion at the end. So that'll be fun.
Good idea. I like that. Yeah.
So I want to talk about something that you don't. You don't really always talk about. And that's what we had to.
Scaring.
Yeah, I know. You had to preempt today's recording for a little while because you got to work at the San Antonio Zoo, correct?
That is correct. Yes, I appreciate you working with me today. We had to bump everything back an hour. Mm-hmm. It is our busy time right now. We're getting to spring break, and the weather's getting nice and stuff down here. So. Yeah, I'm actually a docent, which means that I'm a volunteer educator. So I've been there about 7 years, and I basically just volunteer time each week and go in and I interpret exhibits for people. So when people come in and they're looking at a bear, I step in and kind of give them some information about that bear and just different things to think about, bear facts, and there's always kind of a pro-ecological message about what people can do, because zoos are very much about conservation. That's a big part of our agenda. So we want people to think about conservation and preservation of habitat and stuff. So, so I was up there. It was a busy morning, and I got to bounce all over the place. Now, I should tell people, I do live obviously here in San Antonio, Texas. What many people don't realize about the San Antonio Zoo is that it is the only zoo in the world that has ever mounted an official expedition to search for the Yeti, or abominable snowman of the Himalaya, back in 1957. And this is because we had a guy here in San Antonio named Tom Slick, who was a millionaire and was a brilliant guy, scientist and inventor, and very knowledgeable in a lot of fields. But anyways, he was very interested in the Yeti and Bigfoot later on in the late 50s, and sponsored some expeditions to search for both the Yeti and Bigfoot. He organized the first Pacific Northwest Bigfoot expeditions that included John Green, Rene DeHinden, Bob Titmus, Jerry Crew, and all those guys, Peter Byrne. And so, so in 57, Tom Slick wanted to go search for the Yeti, and he was on the board of directors of the San Antonio Zoo. And so he got them involved and stuff. So they didn't They didn't find a Yeti, unfortunately. I'm sure the zoo would have happily taken a Yeti on the grounds, but they did find some footprints that were interesting and possible scat or droppings. And Tom Slick almost died when one of their vans rolled over on a mountain road. So, I mean, that was kind of scary. But yeah, so the San Antonio Zoo has that bit of history with the Yeti. And we also have some history recently with the Chupacabra, which is a, mythological creature, of course, from Texas and Latin America. And we've had a Chupacabra display for about a year and a half now. I don't want to give too much away in case people want to go see what do they got on display that's a Chupacabra.
It's definitely on my bucket list, I tell you here. I was showing you before, I got the pin from 2020. They released this little pin thing, and it's a medallion, and it's got Chupacabra on it from the zoo.
Yeah,
and
commemorative Chupacabra medallion. That's true. I had to buy those for Lauren Coleman and some other cryptozoologists that wanted those. Yeah, so it's a big part of our history. But, for example, and your listeners will probably have a lot of different ideas about what they think a Chupacabra might be. It's a very confusing cryptid in terms of lots of different descriptions and stories and things. But at least here in terms of Texas, the animals known as Chupacabras here in Texas, the very first one was shot by a chicken farmer outside of San Antonio back in 2004. And this was a guy named Devin McAnally who I've interviewed. And something was killing his chickens, and according to him, was not killing them in a way that he had ever seen before. He was used to coyotes and bobcats and raccoons and other predators killing and stealing his chickens. But according to Devin, something was coming in and killing his chickens and drinking the blood, or exsanguinating the blood from the bodies, and not eating the meat or the flesh, which is really weird. And then about that same time period, he began seeing a strange animal roaming his property. He said it was on four legs, had a weird bluish gray color, long tail, kind of rat, like a giant rat or something. And he shot it and took pictures of it, and no one could identify it at first. They didn't know what the heck it was. And eventually someone here in San Antonio saw the photo and said, well, that's El Chupacabra. That's what that is. And especially since it's drinking the blood of your chickens, supposedly. And so that animal, which was called the Elmendorf beast originally, Elmendorf is the town where it was shot. And I've examined the bones of that particular animal. But the bones, before I ever examined them, they were taken to the San Antonio Zoo and examined because they wanted to get an ID on this animal. So they had dug up these bones. Devin had buried the body after he killed it, and then they went back later and dug it up. And if any of your listeners are fans of UFOs, UFO phenomenon, the guy that kind of spearheaded that excavation and got the bones to the zoo is this guy named Whitley Strieber, who wrote a book called Communion, and he's a big name in the UFO field. He's from San Antonio as well. So, that's the story. So the San Antonio Zoo has a history with the Chupacabra, but even if we had never had the bones of such an animal at our zoo, by the way, it was identified as a known species. So it's not quite as mysterious here as people think. But because we have a big, one of the things I love about living in San Antonio is it's a very festive city. The predominantly Mexican-American population, they have a lot of festivals and fiestas and different things. And so during our spring summer fiesta event last year, they did the Chupacabra exhibit, and they actually had me come out to the zoo and talk about the Chupacabra legend to the zoo visitors, which was very fun. And to me, kind of important, because people talk about how science or scientists reject cryptozoology and cryptids and all that whole thing. But, the San Antonio Zoo is a Aquarium and Zoo Association, AZA associated establishment. It's a recognized, accredited scientific establishment, and they were having cryptozoology lectures there. and I've done cryptozoology lectures there before, but it's kind of cool now that, I have an actual scientific platform, and they don't, grab me and throw me out the door or anything. They let me stand there and talk about it. So, good stuff.
So have you looked into, so I gotta preface this with saying that my favorite cryptid is the Chupacabra. So
it's a good one. I mean, it is. It's got a sinister quality to it. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Why do you like the Chupacabra?
No. By all means.
Why is that your fave?
I don't know. I think when I was in high school, not even when I was in elementary school, I actually did a whole research paper on it when it was the first, in 95 and stuff like that, when it was, first becoming El Chupacabra and all that, when the name was coined and all that and stuff.
Yeah,
so I was really into it back then, and it just kind of went on from there. But so I've talked to you, like when I first met you, I asked you like your opinion on the Chupacabra. So the Texas one, yeah, you don't remember that? No, I remember that.
I probably do.
Yeah.
I get asked these things a lot, but go ahead.
Yeah.
The Texas one, okay.
It was you and Adam Davies sitting at a table.
Okay.
Yeah, and I walked up. Yeah. So what is your opinion, I guess, on the Chupacabra? Because there's not just the Texas one. I mean, you have these reports and stuff that go back to Puerto Rico, and everyone is familiar with I for one, you were on Monster Quest, looking at the Cuero, Texas Chupacabra.
Yeah, that's right.
And that one, all right, I'll give you that. That thing is definitely, the DNA test, the hybrid. I was a Mexican wolf and a coyote, I believe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that thing, I mean, that is not. It's a living animal, right? It's a hybrid and stuff.
Yeah, it's been DNA tested and identified.
But from your perspective of looking at like the zoological side of this stuff, how do you justify the fact that these things are killing animals and not eating them? Because if this thing is a coyote or a wolf, and they're eating these animals, they're killing them to eat, not just for sport or whatever. So when you're looking at the Cuero, Texas one, I'll give you that thing is the one that maybe did it or whatever. But when you look at the Mexican ones where these whole farms of chickens are going dead, do you still think that that's the same thing? Go ahead.
No, it's good questions, Barnaby. Okay, so here's the thing. All cryptids, in my opinion, are pretty much cases of what I refer to as composite identity, meaning that there's a bunch of different things that are kind of being put together in one basket and called one thing. The name Chupacabra means goat sucker, of course, in Spanish. And the first thing I tell people is that keep in mind that the name does not describe a physical description. It describes a behavior. So it's not as specific as people think that one thing has to be a Chupacabra. It's anything that drinks the blood of a goat, right? Also, there are big cultural influences here because in Latin America, the name Chupacabra is basically just like a monster, a vampire, a monster. So in different countries, there are different interpretations of what it's supposed to look like, and so on and so forth. So that's the thing. Here in Texas, these animals that have been called Chupacabras, and you mentioned the one out in Cuero, Texas, and I mentioned the one down in Elmendorf, Texas. I've examined actually half a dozen of these animals, after their carcasses and bones. They're all canids. They're dogs, without a doubt. Not all of them are coyote wolf hybrids. The one that I have the remains for in my freezer was DNA tested, and it turned out to be a domestic dog. That was just a feral dog. Some are coyotes, some are feral dogs, some are wolves. All of those species are pretty closely related anyways, so I don't know if that means a big thing. Why do they look so weird? They're hairless. They have dark bluish gray skin. They have long, super long fangs. Sometimes they have other physical deformities that we've seen. Lots of good questions with regard to that. But let's get back to your point on your question, which is why are these things not eating meat? Or, why are they killing chickens? Because we do hear that a lot. Both Devin McAnally and Phyllis Canyon described to me the same behavior with their the same situation with their chickens, which was basically something was killing their chickens but not eating them. And they interpreted that as, but it was drinking the blood, which I don't know. There's no definitive proof of that, but I've known Devin and Phyllis for years, and they're both pretty smart people. So there's a couple possible reasons why they might not be eating the chickens. One is that they're very sick. These animals are diseased or have some type of congenital situation. Therefore, they're not able to chew, which takes a lot of energy. So the instinct to kill is there because they're hungry, but then once they kill it, they don't have the strength to then tear it apart and eat it. So that's one possibility. They just, half a, well, I don't want to use the word. I don't know how, if your show's PG or 13 or whatever, but
it's whatever you want to be.
They're half-assing it.
Yeah, all right.
They're half-assed dogs. Okay. The other thing is, and this is an interesting theory that Phyllis brought up, and Phyllis is a nutritionist. That's what she does for a living. She speculated that maybe these dogs, these animals, are they're sickly, but they're craving certain nutrients that they're not getting naturally. And one of them would be, like, for example, iron, which is found in blood. And so if they're iron deficient and they're craving that and they kill a chicken, maybe they would be able to lap up enough blood to get some nutrients or minerals or iron out of the blood alone, which is interesting if you think about it. And that would certainly be perceived as it's drinking blood. Well, it's licking blood up because it's craving blood and not able to chew the meat. So there could be some biological reasons why these animals are killing chickens in unusual ways. But again, I've traveled around. I did a TV show in Mexico called for Science Channel on the Chupacabra. And there were several different things that we came across around Mexico that were being called chupacabras. One was a deformed baby goat that was found dead. One was a cyclopean calf that had been born with one big eye in its head. That was a chupacabra. And then finally, where I investigated mass attacks on goats, and they were pretty remarkable incidents because you had basically 3 different goat farms in this one region in Pueblo, Mexico, where something was coming into the goat pen and attacking and or killing dozens of goats in one night. But not really eating them, just killing them. And that was a chupacabra. That last one I kind of speculated was actually a mountain lion and displaying a very irregular behavior. And it has been documented, but it's very rare that there are basically mountain lion mass murderers that will go into a goat or sheep pen and just kill and snap and kill a lot of things. And it's pretty weird, but so anyway, so again, but there's a sample size for you where there were like at least 3 or 4 different types of chupacabras as we traveled across Mexico and encountered different things. So I guess the bottom line is that I'd say that the original Puerto Rican chupacabra that people think about with the big alien-like eyes and the spikes going down the back and the reptilian features, I personally do not view that as a very likely cryptid. It just doesn't match anything in the animal kingdom. I don't think there really have been a lot of reports, at least in recent years. We haven't heard much about it. There's not a lot of body of it. So, I'm not saying there's not something to it, because I always try to remain a little open-minded. So maybe there is some other phenomenon going on, similar to Dogman and some of these really weird creatures that people report. But it's not a flesh and blood predator on the island of Puerto Rico that I think. I think a lot of the attacks in Puerto Rico could have been attributed to sickly dogs, just like the ones here. Maybe they had some dogs that looked like the ones here that were, again, killing goats and chickens, but, not eating the meat. And that could have been part of the origin of the legend and so forth. So who knows? It's a great mystery.
Mm-hmm. Just curious. I can't remember offhand, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I read it in one of John Green's books that way back in like 1800s or earlier in Europe, there was a lot of similar cases to the Puerto Rico stuff of the chickens and the goats being killed and just drained of blood but not eaten. I know it was in one of their, either John Green or the
Lauren
John
Coleman?
I don't think it was Lauren Coleman.
John Keel.
I think it might be John Keel. John Keel or John Green. I can't remember. One of their books. But they had written a lot about these. They obviously didn't call it Chupacabra because the book was written like in the 70s or something. I don't remember. But
Gotcha.
so that wasn't around then. But the same MO of this thing was over in Europe or something.
Interesting. I'm not sure if John Green ever wrote about any cryptids other than Bigfoot. I could be wrong about that. John Keel may have later in life, and other cryptid researchers. I can't think of too many cases in Europe, but I know that in Puerto Rico, there was something called the Vampire of Mocha back in 1975 that was supposedly killing in a similar fashion. So, people that say, well, the Chupacabra disappeared in the 90s, you can go back and say, well, no, actually in Puerto Rico, there were Chupacabra type attacks supposedly going on 20 years before that. But I don't know. There are a lot of books out there that cover the subject. So kind of off the top of my head, I'm not sure which one we might be talking about. But
yeah, I can't remember. After you think about it, I think it was Keel. It was one of his books. Because he covers a lot of
Keel covers a lot of the weird things, Mothman and things like the Chupacabra. Absolutely.
I always like to look at like Bigfoot or the Yeti or the Yaren and I can't think anymore, Yowie. Every country around the world and stuff has these sightings of what is a very similar creature. So whenever we're looking at like Chupacabra or Mothman or any Dogman or any of these things, if you look at the cultures around the world, a lot of these places have the exact same creatures, and they call them different things. The United States is a really good example of, every state has its own Bigfoot, but they call it something different and stuff.
It's true.
And on the topic of Mothman, like you look at these things, like everyone knows the Point Pleasant Mothman and stuff. And then recently, I don't know if you heard all the stuff about the Chicago Mothman and the sightings there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of that.
But if you look at like some of these other things and you stop searching Mothman and you start searching like Owlman or winged humanoid or giant bat, stuff like that, you get the same descriptions of these creatures, like the Ahul or is it the not orang pendek, that's a Bigfoot. I can't think of the other one I'm trying to think of, but there's other ones around the world that have this very similar MO to the Mothman. So
it's true.
Do you think that like these creatures are the same? Because we were just talking about like the Chupacabra was only really like, you don't have those type of sightings all over the world, but things like the Mothman you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're talking about winged cryptids in general, and I've written a couple of books on those, I find that I get three basic types of reports of winged cryptids. Two are more specific to North America, or at least one. Okay, we'll start with one that's specific to North America, is called the Thunderbird, which seems to be connected to Native American legends of these giant super birds. And they're always described as having feathers, big hooked beak, dark color, massive wingspans, 15, 20 feet across. That's one type. I get a lot of those reports. I also get reports of living pterosaurs, which are, of course, the bat-winged flying reptiles from the Cretaceous. And, well, actually, they were around for about 150 million years ago, starting in the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. They're not birds at all, but they have these wings, and they supposedly died out 65 million years ago, but I've interviewed many people that swear they've seen those flying around. And then the third type is more like the weird flying humanoid types, like Mothman. And in that third category, it seems that there are some similarities, but I would say there are actually more differences in terms of like, for example, the Owlman of England looks very different from the Mothman of the US, They both are half man, half bird. They both have big eyes, red glowing eyes. But other than that, Owlman's smaller, has more like an owl-like feathered appearance. Around the world, you have other similar, the Papabawa and the, excuse me, the Ahul and some, the Orang Bati. I think that's the one you were trying to think of earlier, the man bat. So I don't know. The third category is really a problem in terms of, at least in terms of a zoological question, because you can't have that much variation within any type of species, and they don't seem to be flesh and blood unknown animals. They seem to be kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the Puerto Rican Chupacabra, or the Jersey Devil, or Dogman, mermaids. I mean, some of these things are just so far out that you wonder, what they could be. They're not animals, but there are so many traditions around the world, as you said, that are similar. That's intriguing. So you wonder if it's other, or I wonder if it's some other type of phenomenon or mystery that's just beyond our comprehension, that where these creatures appear. And I don't know. It sounds weird, but I've interviewed witnesses that have seen these things, and they seem to be very sincere and credible. But I don't know. I can't explain some of those really far out weird creatures that are like Mothman and others. It's just, but I'm open minded that there is something to it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
We just went down to Chicago last year and did a whole 2-part episode looking for the Chicago Mothman. And whenever we go out looking for any kind of cryptids or something, we, take it and just go look for it. Like if it's a living being, like Bigfoot, where is it going to live? What's it going to sound like? What's it eating and stuff? And we went down to Chicago, and there's this huge stretch of forest that runs parallel to the entire downtown Chicago. And I don't think that a lot of people realize that it's there, because I didn't until we started looking into this. And this is about 5 miles of woods, and it's about a couple city blocks wide. So it's not that wide, but it's long. And me and my other investigator, Derek, we hiked through a lot of that and stuff, and looked through it, and it gets pretty dense and pretty dark. But the problem is with stuff like Mothman and stuff, there's just no, people are seeing these things. We interviewed people that have seen them, and they obviously saw something. These people are very credible, very honest, and they know what they saw in that. But there's no footprints, there's no evidence that comes up. Bigfoot, you have possible stick structures, you have footprints, you have possible hair samples, you have
vocalizations that have been recorded. Yeah,
all this evidence that goes with it. But what do we got on Mothman and these other? I mean, even open it up to any of these, the pterosaurs and stuff like that. Do you have any evidence of these things at all, other than witness accounts?
There is, in terms of the Thunderbirds, there is one controversial film that was shot in July of 1977 at Lake Shelbyville, Illinois. And it just shows 2 big birds, massive, but they look huge. I mean, they look bigger than a vulture or anything, but it's controversial because it's, it's hard to make a definitive conclusion. But you're right. There are I've never seen any evidence in terms of Mothman photos, footprints, other physical trace evidence and things that you would look for. So that is a problem. I think you're right on about that. Now, I'd like to kind of piggyback on something you just said about Chicago, because I have a lot of maps on my walls. You can't see them, unfortunately, right now because they're over here on this side. But one of the things I do is I map locations of different types of sightings and try to correlate patterns based on physical descriptions or other things. And Illinois overall has a lot of winged cryptids, not just the Chicago Mothman, but Thunderbirds, and throughout Illinois, pterosaur reports. But I've interviewed at least one gentleman that had a good Thunderbird sighting near Chicago. So, in one of those wooded areas. And I think I also have one good living pterosaur report from that same region. So that's another interesting aspect to the winged cryptid phenomena, is there seems to be a lot of overlap. Like where you have clusters of one type, you'll have the other 2 types or one of the other types, which doesn't really make sense unless there's only one thing flying around that people don't know what it is. And it's all comes down to just perspective and interpretation. So one person's Mothman is another person's Thunderbird or living pterosaur, if that makes sense. And it's just the way people... Because we got to remember, if you see anything like that, you're obviously going to be in a very emotionally charged state. I mean, you're seeing something that you don't know what it is. It shouldn't exist. So, I mean, I can imagine that's a very emotional time and your adrenaline's pumping. And so it's harder for people in that heightened state of emotion to accurately interpret and remember what it is they're seeing. They see something giant with wings. So again, speculating here, but maybe that's what's happening is there really is just one type of giant winged thing out there, and people are just describing it different ways or interpreting it different ways, which makes a little more sense, although it's still even highly improbable that you could have a man-sized thing with 20-foot wingspan flying around, without being seen more often or photographed more often or leaving more physical trace evidence, because, it's in the sky, it's in the air. It's not as easy to hide as something like Bigfoot or something that lives under the water. So.
Yeah. I was just going to say, they do say that they screech really loud too. And it's like, nobody's ever recorded that. They can record a Bigfoot or whatever, but they don't think to record that.
That's a great point. No, you're absolutely right. At least I've never heard, a recording of that. But you're right. People have reported that there's Mothman supposedly made kind of a squeaking mechanical noise, according to Linda Scarberry and some of the original witnesses. I guess I've heard of people talking about Thunderbirds and some of these others making loud squawks or screeches or whatever. But yeah, no one's managed to capture that and record it as far as I know.
So if we're talking about like these Thunderbirds and Pterosaurs and stuff actually existing, you would have to have some sort of breeding population, or these things are living for a very long time. Do you see that like in your research and that of places you've investigated where it seems like there's enough reports to have a breeding population, or what do you think as far as like their home range is?
Yeah. So again, that's a big problem. And, I appreciate that kind of questioning and challenging and critical thinking, because those things have to be discussed. It's just the laws of nature. In terms of living pterosaurs, and the sightings are all over North America and actually all over the world. But, I'm just going to address the North American pterosaur reports. Excuse me. There are certain concentrated areas. And one of those is South Texas, which is one of the reasons I live in San Antonio, because I've been investigating these living pterosaur reports since 2003. We get a lot of those types of reports around San Antonio. And in fact, I have it sitting on my desk, here is a newspaper clippings from 1976 where 3 school teachers claim they saw 2 giant pterodactyls flying overhead. Okay, so that was in the local newspapers. One theory about the pterosaurs that are mostly seen in southern Texas and parts of the American Southwest is they could actually live in Mexico, and perhaps their habitat are the mountain ranges of Mexico, which you have the Sierra Madres. There's 2 different ranges called the Sierra Madres. There's the Oriental and the Occidental. And they're pretty remote. I've actually been to and investigated flying cryptids in one of those mountain ranges south of Monterey. And it's pretty remote. I mean, you're there, you're out in the desert, in the mountains, and not a lot of people. Excuse me. So, years ago, I corresponded with a cryptozoologist named Richard Greenwell, former secretary for the International Society of Cryptozoology. Sadly, he passed away of cancer about 2006, I believe. But before he did, we corresponded on the living pterosaur reports, and he told me that he had a contact in eastern Mexico who swore that there was a population of them living there. And then if you go back and look at some of the ancient Maya carvings and ruins on some of the, there's like the ruins of, they're the ones near Veracruz. It starts with a T. I'm sorry, it's escaping me right now. But Tajín, the ruins of Tajín, there are actually pterodactyl-like creatures that are carved in some of the ancient Maya bas-reliefs there. So again, this is all just like fun speculation on my part, but that's interesting that you have those clues. The Mayas documenting things that look like pterosaurs, and then people saying there's populations of them in East Mexico, and then you have a habitat that's pretty remote down there. So I guess the theory would be, if they did exist, they could live in those mountain ranges, and maybe they're just traveling or migrating on occasion into South Texas or other parts of the United States and returning. But again, from a scientific and zoological point of view, it sounds pretty impossible, very low probability, but not totally impossible. And I guess that's the funnest part of cryptozoology for me, is a lot of things we talk about here, because science is never 100%, other than math and gravity, pretty much everything in science is, up for debate and controversial. So, yeah, it's possible that these things exist somewhere. The Native American Thunderbirds, I don't know. Some of those might be based on legends of condors or big eagles or different things. But again, the Mothman and the flying humanoids, that's a whole nother level of strangeness. And to me personally, as a cryptozoologist, I tend to group that kind of phenomenon more with paranormal UFOs and some of those really, non-physical, metaphysical kinds of things that go on. So.
Well, looking at it from a zoological standpoint as well, when you're looking at the species birds and even monarch butterflies and stuff that migrate so far, I mean, you're talking about these things living down in Mexico and stuff. These things are a lot bigger than a butterfly or a Canadian goose or something, especially if people are seeing them fly over in that. So it's not a far stretch to think that these things could migrate from Mexico to Canada or something and back, and people are just seeing them on the way. I mean, like you said, you got the maps and stuff. Does that seem like there's a migratory path or lines or anything?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can see patterns. I mean, in fact, and I wish I could show you this map. It's on the other side of the room, but it's got all the winged cryptids mapped in North America. My buddy Lyle Blackburn, who's also kind of a Bigfoot hunter, cryptozoologist, cryptid hunter kind of guy, he came over and was visiting me a couple years ago, and he hadn't been to my apartment. And he walked in and he looked at my map he said, "Is that a map of winged cryptids?" I said, "Yeah, those are locations of winged cryptids, and they're color coded so you can see what." And he looked at it for a minute. He said, "You can see patterns there, like migration patterns." And I said, "Yeah, you can." If you look at the map, it does look like there are certain, concentrations that go up. So, I mean, it's all subjective, but he saw it. I didn't bring it up. So, yeah, I mean, it is possible that these things do migrate. Now, something else worth pointing out, I think, and this is just my perspective, is it seems like as technology gets better and better, it seems like people are spending less and less time looking up, right? Mm-hmm. Where is people's focus these days?
Down.
It's down. It's in front of their face or down. How much time do people spend these days just looking up in the sky? Back in the day, or maybe when we were kids, when I was a kid, we could, you look up at the sky because there's not as much to do. So, so again, speculation, but maybe these things are occasionally flying over people's heads and they're just not seeing it because they're just not looking up. So.
How much looking up did you do as a kid?
A lot.
Yeah.
Right?
A lot of watching clouds and, just.
Yeah, watching clouds and looking at the sky and, that's what we did. So.
Yeah, I mean, I ain't that old either, but I didn't spend that.
What are you saying?
Just looking at you. I didn't.
Yeah, don't look at him.
I grew up playing in a big sandbox in the backyard. I mean, I didn't watch TV. We didn't have cable or nothing. So, and we didn't have cell phones or nothing when I was growing up. So the internet was pretty much invented when I was in school. So,
yeah,
I mean, there you go. So we didn't have a lot of the resources, that people have today. And I think it's very disappointing to kind of trail off topic here, but you have, I got my cell phone here. You have the sum of all human knowledge is right here. You can look up whatever you want, anytime, any place, anywhere. You can study anything you want. And people are watching stupid people on TikTok or cat videos and stuff, and that's what you're doing with your time. I mean, you could do so much to better yourself and learn a skill, or I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money to go to college or, do any of that stuff. Half the stuff you can learn right on your phone, and people are like, kitties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? To each their own, man. I don't judge, but I'm, like you probably, I'm an information junkie. So, I mean, that's what I love about the internet, and just something will occur to me and, gee, I wonder, what that is or what that does. And I'd love to soak that all in, but I enjoy a good TikTok video as well as the next guy. But, since we're getting into social commentary a little bit here, and I'm becoming the kind of the old grouchy guy now. Seriously, a big problem I see with with the smartphone generation is they're losing a lot of social interaction skills. I live in an apartment complex here that's right next to a college campus in San Antonio, so a lot of my neighbors are college students. And if you say hi to them, it's like, they freak out because they don't know how to, interact.
Why are you talking? Get my text. Send me a Snapchat. God.
Head down, facing the thing. And it's like, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to judge, but it's like, to me, that's a problem for our species. Because it's like, hey, come on, you're my neighbor. We should be able to just say hi. And it's not like a really uncomfortable situation to do that, but.
You've seen the movie.
Technology's taken out. I guess there's no way we can stop it because, TikTok is and so forth. So,
you seen the movie WALL-E? The little robot.
Oh yeah.
That's exactly where we're going right there. We're all going to sit in chairs and just ride around and
No, that's a good one.
All right, man. We are almost at the end of this interview, and I really appreciate it. I want to do a real rapid fire with you. Like just a quick little real, just your basic thoughts on these topics here. So we've covered a little bit on Bigfoot. You haven't seen one, but you believe those things are probably real. So we're gonna go down I have a little shelf of cryptids right here.
Oh,
I can't see. They're all facing the knee.
All facing the other way. So I guess first of all, do you think it exists? Or we'll start with this easy question. Out of all the cryptids that you've investigated or anything, what is probably the one that you think is most likely to exist?
The thylacine. Thylacynus cynocephalus, or Tasmanian tiger, Tasmanian wolf of Tasmania, Australia. Yep, there you go. That's
I got it right there.
Cryptid right there. We know they existed until 1936. And a recent scientific survey, based on all of the variables, they predicted that they were probably at least alive until, maybe 20, 30 years ago. So, they should still be alive, or at least some, So I think they're very probable that they are out there in very small numbers.
Cool. All right. Mothman.
I mean, this is tough because I think there's something to it. I don't think people are just making it up, but I don't, if you're asking me, is it a flesh and blood animal? No, absolutely not. It's another type of phenomenon that has some validity to it.
Okay.
Does that qualify as an answer?
That's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
There's something to it, but it's not an animal. It's not. Yeah.
Cool. The Dogman. You've touched on it a little bit.
Same thing. There are actually a lot of parallels between Mothman and Dogman people don't want to hear about it because I have friends that are on Dogman world, and it's like, well, let's talk about the flying humanoids. Why? It's because I've studied both, and it's the same phenomenon. It's something is manifesting as a half man, half bird, and sometimes it's a half man, half dog. Sometimes it might be a half man, half other animal, but it makes sense that whatever this mechanism, this phenomenon is, it just takes different forms. And that's why you have so many different physical descriptions. And it scares people. They both terrify people. That's what they're intending to do for whatever reason.
At least with the Dogman, though, you have like the what's the big dogs? The dire wolves. You have the kind of fossil record to say that they're a little bit more credible to me, at least, than the Mothman. Because you don't have these armed winged creatures.
Well, you certainly have large canids in North America, but dire wolves actually had much shorter legs than modern wolves, so they looked even less human-like one can make an argument, or less likely to go up on their hind legs, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know, I mean, people put other theories for Dogman out there. One that I think is fascinating is if you took a giant baboon and took its tail off, it would look exactly like Dogman. Baboons run on their hind legs and they have that wolf-like muzzle. And there were prehistoric baboons like Dinopithecus that were huge, but they all had a long tail. And I guess that's maybe the non-star. I don't hear a lot of Dogman reports where people talk about a big long tail, but
interesting.
Yeah.
How about
maybe a little more? I don't know if it is more probable than Mothman. We can go off on a whole tangent here. So keep going.
All right, keep going.
I think it's the same phenomenon. I think from what I hear, it seems like something that just takes different forms. Half man, half something. Mm-hmm.
I got one for you.
Okay.
Hopkinsville Goblin.
Oh yeah.
What do you think of those guys?
Where'd you get that action?
I got this at Cryptid Con. They were down at Cryptid Con. They were 3D printing them. Yeah.
Okay. Is that from Geraldine?
I don't know.
Geraldine Stith Sutton, the woman who was there? Okay.
Don't know.
So I'll tell you what the Hopkinsville Goblins were not. They were not monkeys that had been spray painted silver, which was one of the theories that came out at the time. And I write about that in my book. It's like, that's almost more ludicrous than anything else. But, they're aliens or ETs, or again, and it might be something related to these other phenomena we're talking about, non-physical. But it seems like there really was something that attacked that property that particular evening. I've spoken to Geraldine, who, like I said, she was a kid when that happened, but she was there, and her parents were terrified that, there was something that was out to get them. So,
all right, two more. What about puckwedgies?
Puckwedgies, yeah, those might be related to. I think we're talking about Littlefoot, basically, when you talk about anything humanoid and small. And I have a whole chapter in my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, dedicated to Littlefoot, because as I've traveled across the continent, I've spoken to mostly Native American people from different cultures that all have stories and traditions of little people, the little ones. And they sound kind of like little Bigfoots. They're usually hairy, powerful, aggressive, and the puckwudgies seem to fall into that category. So I think the puckwudgies are probably a North Atlantic. I know in Indiana it's a big thing, and also in some of the New England states. I can't remember what tradition we're talking about, but yeah, puckwudgies are probably like a Littlefoot type thing, and sure, they might exist.
Cool. And again, another book that you've written, so we're going to keep it nice and short, but Nessie and Other Lake Monsters.
Oh yeah, The Essential Guide to Loch Ness Monsters, my newest book. Yes, I think there's something there. I think it's one species spread across the globe. I don't think it's a plesiosaur or any type of surviving prehistoric reptile. I think it's a giant, all giant, but I think if anything, it's a surviving type of prehistoric whale known as a basilosaur or a zeuglodon, which is basically like a long snake-like whale that can be 40 to 60 feet long, has a horse-like head. And that kind of fits the descriptions of these Nessie and Other Lake Monsters.
Interesting. I've never heard that. Got one on me.
Did you read his book? No.
I have. We have both read your Essential Guide to Bigfoot because you were supposed to be you were supposed to be speaking last year at the Marinette Menominee Bigfoot Convention, and we picked up a copy of your book and everything before that and read it. And
thank you.
Oh, of course, yeah, definitely. And it's really good. I really thought it was very. I mean, it covers everything. Like it's very well done. So I'm really looking forward to reading your Nessie one as well. And I do have a copy.
Well, thank
of it.
you.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. I just recently got I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I recently got a review of The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster via email, and the review was written by a guy named Henry Bauer, who wrote a book about Nessie back in the 1980s that's very famous, and he's a college professor from Virginia, and I didn't even know he was still alive. He's in his 90s.
Wow.
And that to me was such an amazing honor that this guy, I grew up reading his Nessie book, and and he read my book, and he gave it a fair review. He liked it, but he did point out some fair criticisms. But anyways, that was pretty cool for me, and those are the things I live for when you have those kinds of moments in life. So
the little validations of.
So yeah, I think it's a good book. I mean, the foreword to the book is written by a guy named Steve Feltham, who has been researching the Loch Ness Monster for 30 years there on Loch Ness, and he also said it was a pretty good book. So I'm proud of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I mean, if it's anything as good as the Bigfoot one, it should be a really good read. So you got to get your books out on audiobook, because I I do a lot of I work all day for like 12-hour shifts. And I sit and listen to podcasts or audiobooks all day, so I don't have a lot of time to sit down and actually read a physical book. And I did. So, I mean, if that means anything to you, I read your other books. So.
Well, thank you. The Essential Guide to Bigfoot is in audiobook format.
I know, it's the only one, and I actually read it. And I went on Audible, and I'm like, Ken Gerhard. Oh, sure, the one book I actually read.
Sorry, guys. Audiobooks are incredibly expensive to make. Just so you understand, it's the economics of it. So hopefully to get there someday, but you have to hire a narrator, and it takes a lot of time and editing, and so that's why. But hopefully we'll get there at some point.
So what I need you to do between now and the con is sit down and read the book on an audio recorder and just bring it for me if you could. So, I mean, that's okay. I would really appreciate that. So
we'll figure something out.
Just read this book to me.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hang. You just hang tight here after this interview. You can read it to me live right now. All right, cool, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I hopefully will have that book read before I see you again.
I read the flying one, the flying cryptids or whatever, the dinosaurs and stuff, the pterosaurs and all that. I read that book. Yeah,
I'll have all those books with me at the festival in Marinette, Menominee, right? Am I saying that right? Okay, looking forward to that, Menominee.
Guys. June 4th in Upper Michigan, right on the border there.
Perfect.
I just reserved your hotel, so you're all set.
Thank you. Awesome. That's good. I'm getting excited. It's going to be a good time.
Definitely. So this, we're recording this back in March right now, but this will probably come out in mid-May. So given your schedule and stuff offhand, do you know any other events that you got coming up from, like, say, the beginning of May through the rest of the year that you want to help promote?
Let's see. In May, I will be at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Festival in Townsend, Tennessee. I'll be at the first ever Alabama Bigfoot Conference in Oxford, Alabama. I will be at the you guys have I'll be at the I can't remember what it's called, but it's one down in Michigan also, West Branch, Michigan.
Oh, yep. I think
Bigfoot Days or something like that. Sorry, I don't have my calendar here in front of me. Yeah, that's then your event, and then I'll also be speaking at the Haunted America Conference in Alton, Illinois.
Van Mater?
So, I'm sorry?
Van Mater Festival? I think you're there.
Oh, I'm not going to be. I'm afraid I'm not going to be at Van Meter this year.
Sorry.
I'll be at the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference in October up in upstate Minnesota, Grand Prairie, I believe.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, I've got several events coming up over the summer.
Very cool. So much like me, it's hard to remember where everyone's going to be. So where can we go online and find those dates and locations? Where can we find you?
Awesome, guys. Thank you. So I have a website, kengerhard.com. I'm also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel. So yeah, just if people Google me, they should be able to get that info. So
cool. Awesome. Well, I will make sure I get as many of those links into our show notes as I can so that people can find those and we can find them for you. And make sure you go check out Ken Gerhard at any of his live events, especially June 4th up in Marinette, Menominee, Michigan, the Bigfoot Paranormal Convention. You will be speaking with myself and Sheetan Noor and Allison Jornlin and Mary Sutherland.
Cool. That sounds like a great group. I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. Very cool. Well, again, I want to thank you for being on the show today and giving us your time, and safe travels wherever you go and all your events. And until next time, guys, I am Barnaby.
I'm Ma.
I'm Ken Gerhard.
There you go. We'll see you next time, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Whispers from the Dark. To find out more about cryptids, anomalies, and the Paranormal Society, visit us at our website at wisconsincaps.com. That's wisconsincaps.com. There you can find links to all of our social media: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and our Patreon. You will see links to our online store as well, where you can get t-shirts, DVDs, and more. If you click on the public events page, you can find out where you can meet us in person and all the public events we have coming up. If you enjoy our podcast or our YouTube shows, please consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/WisconsinCaps. There you can find behind-the-scenes pictures and videos from all of our media, as well as bonus footage and evidence that we have collected. If you have encountered something you can't explain, we want to hear from you. Visit our website and click on Submit a Report on our main screen. You can choose to leave your contact information or simply remain anonymous. You can also reach us via email at wisconsincaps@gmail.com. If you would like to be a guest on our show, please contact us on our Whispers from the Dark podcast page on Facebook, or send us an email at wisconsincaps.com. Remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen or watch or find us.